Welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled How AEG Worldwide Reduced Their Payment Cycle by Approximately 60% with ImageNow. I'm Corey Crane, an account executive at Perceptive Software. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Brandon Weiss. Brandon is the Senior Director of Financial Systems and Process Improvements at AEG Worldwide. Brandon is ImageNow Project Manager, which is based, and the company is based out of Los Angeles, California. Brandon has led the RFP process to select Perceptive Software as the vendor of choice for AEG account payable solutions. In the last 2 years, Brandon has managed the design, development, rollout, and training of AEG's ImageNow solution. Prior to joining AEG, Brandon has worked in similar roles as the Walt Disney World and Raytheon Corporation. Now, I would like to turn it over to Brandon to discuss how AEG Worldwide has reduced its accounts payable cycle by approximately 60% with ImageNow.
Thank you, Corey. All right, so I'm sure everybody can see the slides on the screen. We're going to start off by talking about what we're going to cover today. So basically, Corey did a good intro. We're going to basically do a walkthrough from start to finish of our new workflow process that we developed here at AEG. By using not only Perceptive Software's ImageNow product, but also by using J.D. Edwards, which is our ERP system. So the agenda for this presentation will be walking through our old accounts payable process and then talking about how we changed our accounts payable process with the use of ImageNow, and we'll cover some lessons learned and we'll go over a solution overview. But first, I want to give you a little bit of background about our own company. We'll talk about our AEG's parent company, the Anschutz company, and then we'll talk about AEG itself. And then I'll give you a little bit of background about our J.D. Edwards environment and our ImageNow environment. So the Anschutz company was founded in 1965 and has grown exponentially ever since, both organically and through acquisition. Some of the Anschutz company's holdings include AEG, which is where I work, AEG Live, Anschutz Exploration Corporation, Xanterra Parks, Clarity Media, Anschutz Film Group, Walden Media, and Assorted Philanthropy. Currently, the Anschutz company is doing business in 4 continents: America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. AEG, or the Anschutz Entertainment Group, is a sports and entertainment company based here in Los Angeles. We own several sports teams, including the LA Kings, the LA Galaxy, the Houston Dynamo, and we have a partial ownership in the LA Lakers. Additionally, AEG owns many facilities, including Staples Center, Sprint Center in Kansas City, the O2 Arena in London, Nokia Theater here at LA Live, which is also one of our entertainment districts. AEG also owns AEG Live, which is the world's second largest presenter of live music around the world, doing about 10,000 shows per year. So you can see that AEG is quite a large organization. Our ERP system is J.D. Edwards. We started using J.D. Edwards back in 2000. We had multiple entities around the world using different financial systems. I wanted to consolidate into one ERP, which is the reason we moved forward with J.D. Edwards. We're currently running on Enterprise 1 9.0.2 on iSeries. And we're using many of the J.D. Edwards modules, including financials, job costing, distribution, real estate management, etc. Currently, J.D. Edwards is rolled out to over 300 different legal entities. It's deployed across 6 different time zones. We're supporting 9 different fiscal periods. And we have about 20 different accounting departments with 500 module users using the system on a daily basis. With ImageNow, Perceptive's product, we're currently using ImageNow 6.6, and we're currently only using ImageNow in the accounts payable process, but we have plans of using it in other areas of our business in the future, such as human resources, our legal department, etc. Right now, we have ImageNow rolled out to 60 different legal entities. We're deployed across 4 different time zones, and we have about 750 users currently. When we rolled out ImageNow, we initially rolled it out just to our corporate office here in downtown LA as kind of our pilot test, and that was back in March of 2011. Since then, we've rolled it out to our LA Kings Hockey Club, to our facilities division, and to all of AEG Live domestically. By the end of 2012, we'll also roll out ImageNow to AEG Europe and the remaining U.S. facilities that we have not rolled it out to yet. So that's the background of AEG and our systems, and now I'll start talking about our accounts payable process. I'll be the first one to admit that our old accounts payable process was pretty terrible. We had paper invoices coming in from all over the world, going to all different people in our organization. Many vendors were sending their invoices to their contacts in the marketing or the operations department, and then it would take days, if not weeks, for those folks to pass the invoices over to the accounting group. So we had not only were they sending those invoices to the accounting group, then accounting would have to send it back out for approvals. So we had paper being mailed back and forth between all of our different offices around the world. Because of that, we had no idea where invoices were or if they were even in-house yet. So when vendors called, we didn't have any way of telling them when they would be paid or if we even had their invoice in-house. We didn't have any way of estimating our accruals at month end. Oftentimes, accounts payable was receiving invoices to start processing after the due date that was already posted on that invoice, so we were obviously had a lot of invoices being paid late. We also, obviously, because everything was paper-based, spent a lot of time filing the invoices and making copies of invoices, and then if anybody needed to see that in the future, we would have to go back to those filing cabinets or to our off-site storage partner to get those invoices pulled. So all in all, the old payment cycle was taking us on average 44 days. And as I mentioned before, because it was taking 44 days, we had lots of late fees, and we were not able to take advantage of any early payment discounts. So we decided to use ImageNow to overhaul our AP process, and we'll get into the specifics in the upcoming slides. But basically, ImageNow becomes your electronic file cabinet. All of the invoices become electronic, and you view them on your computer. And all those invoices will flow through a workflow process that you will define. It's a completely customized workflow. And because everything is electronic at this point, all of the approvals for those invoices can be done electronically as well. We even have email notifications going out to the approvers to let them know that they have something to approve in the system. Currently, we have our approval matrix stored in a customer table within JD Edwards. So all of our approval matrices are stored there, and whenever ImageNow needs to send an invoice out for approval, it references that customer table to make sure it's sending it to the right person. We also built a real-time integration through web services between JD Edwards and ImageNow. So all of the AP entry is now done within ImageNow, and it feeds immediately over to JD Edwards. What you see on the screen now is a listing of some of the features of ImageNow we're currently using. A couple of them I wanted to call out, and we'll talk about it in more detail, is the custom eForm, the custom scripts, tasks, and the workflow. All of those components really are the backbone of our accounts payable solution, and I'll talk to each of those in detail in the upcoming slides. What you see on the screen now is a very simplified version of our workflow diagram. I wanted to kind of walk you through this at a high level so you get an understanding of how an invoice flows through the system, and then we'll get into more detail momentarily. So right now, when we went live with ImageNow as our AP solution, we instructed all of our vendors to start mailing or emailing their invoices to a third party that we hired. That third party is scanning all of those paper invoices, and they're actually indexing or typing in 6 key fields off of that invoice. So they're typing in the invoice number, the invoice amount, the invoice date, fields like that. And once they're finished indexing all that information, the image itself and those index fields feed into ImageNow. Once in ImageNow, our accounts payable department are the first folks to actually see that invoice and do anything with it. So at that point, what they're going to do is actually fill in the custom eForm that we have in the system, which is basically like entering in the accounting information they used to type into JD Edwards prior to ImageNow. At that point, they can also run a document validation to make sure that the accounting information they typed in is actually pertinent and it makes sense according to the JD Edwards rules that we have in place. The accounting staff is also determining at this point who needs to approve these invoices. So they'll reference the approval matrix, choose who needs to approve it, and at that point they're going to route it forward. The invoice then goes into a duplicate check that we've created, and that duplicate check is looking across all of ImageNow to make sure that this invoice is not already in the system so that we don't double pay any invoice. Assuming the invoice is okay and it's not a duplicate, it's going to route forward into the approval process at that point. Once it has all the necessary approvals, it actually goes back to accounts payable for their final check, and then it goes to a finance director for their final review before all the information is passed to J.D. Edwards to be paid. Once the invoice and the batch that it's in are posted to J.D. Edwards, a payment is made out of J.D. Edwards like it always has been, and then all of the payment information is fed back into ImageNow, and the information related to that payment is married up to the invoice that it paid. So in the future, if you pull up either that invoice number or that payment number, you're going to see both the invoice and a copy of the check or any of the payment information that pertains to that payment. So to get a little bit more detailed about that workflow diagram we just went through, I'm going to kind of talk about each step. So I mentioned before that we had all of our vendors send their invoices to a third party. That third party is named Scanning America. They're based out of Lawrence, Kansas. So Scanning America, like I said, is receiving all of those invoices, scanning them in, and then indexing the 6 key fields. Custom eForm and typing in all of the pertinent accounting information. And in the upcoming slides, I'll show you a picture of what our eForm looks like. Most importantly, accounting at this point is identifying who needs to approve this invoice. So again, they're referencing the approval matrix, and they're choosing the approver that this needs to go to. So before ImageNow, accounts payable was primarily doing heads-down accounting input. Now they're actually having to make decisions and be the gatekeeper of the system, determining who these invoices need to flow through. Before they route the document forward, they're also doing accounting is also doing a validation of the eForm. So it's validating all the information they typed in versus our J.D. Edwards possible input. As an example, if they type in a vendor number that doesn't exist in J.D. Edwards, the system's going to give them an error at this point in the validation, telling them they have an error on the vendor field and they need to correct it. Once everything checks out with the validation, they can route the document forward in workflow. So here's a picture of our eForm with very little information typed in here already. But you can see, if you're familiar with J.D. Edwards, that this looks very similar to the J.D. Edwards input screens that our accounting staff was used to prior to ImageNow. And we designed it that way to keep the training minimal, so they were looking at something that they've seen before and the fields were all relevant. This next picture shows you an eForm that has information filled out on it. So this is what a completed eForm might look like. And at the bottom, you can see all of the GL coding for this invoice. You can see that it's split across multiple GL accounts, and that you can even have different amounts for each GL code, just like you could in your typical ERP system. The next stop in the workflow for the document is the duplicate check. And the requirements for that duplicate check are defined through a custom script within ImageNow. And at first, when we rolled this out, we had the duplicate check requirements really tight, and we had a high percentage of documents actually going through the duplicate check because the system was identifying a lot of potential duplicates. Since then, we've actually been able to relax those requirements a little bit and have a smaller percentage of documents going through that check. So because the custom script is actually very customizable, we can change those requirements on the fly as needed. Once everything's checked out with the duplicate check, the document routes into the approval process. And this is really where we're getting the most bang for our buck with ImageNow. As I mentioned before, the invoices are approved on a defined approval matrix. And when someone has an invoice to approve, they're going to receive an email from the system telling them that they need to sign in to approve or reject that invoice. We actually have two different types of tasks set up in the system, and a task is basically when you assign a document to someone to approve. That's called a task. We have our regular tasks and we have our urgent tasks. For our regular or normal tasks, an email will go out twice a day reminding the approver that they have something to review in the system. If it's an urgent task, they have to review that invoice. They will receive an email for that invoice immediately, telling them they need to sign in right away that there's an urgent task for them to approve. If they do not, the way we have the systems configured is if the approver does not sign in and take action on that invoice on a regular task within 3 business days, that invoice will actually automatically escalate to the next approver in the hierarchy. That way, if someone doesn't take action, it doesn't hold up the process of paying one of our vendors. The invoice will continue along the path of getting approved. Lastly, when an approver actually does click on the Approve button within ImageNow, the system automatically puts an approval stamp annotation directly on the invoice. And an annotation is basically like a stamp you would use on a paper invoice, and it says this has been approved by Brandon Weiss on June 3rd. And that way, going forward, you can always reference that invoice and see who approved it on what date. Once the invoice is finally approved, it goes back to accounts payable and then to a finance director for everyone's final review. And this is really important because this is the last time somebody's going to be able to review any of the accounting information or the payment of this invoice before it goes to J.D. Edwards to be paid. Once it passes those reviews, it gets uploaded to J.D. Edwards, and a final system check is done to make sure all of the information in the eForm has been populated correctly. And we've also set up 2 options for the users. They can either send something to J.D. Edwards real time, or they can submit a bunch of invoices in a batch, and that batch will then go into J.D. Edwards on a scheduled process that happens 3 times a day. Once the batch gets into J.D. Edwards, an accounting user will still have to go into the system and post that batch just like they used to have to do prior to ImageNow. And then once that batch is posted, the payment goes out exactly as it did previously. And then as I mentioned earlier when I was showing you the workflow diagram, any information related to the payment of an invoice is fed back into ImageNow, and it marries itself up to the invoice itself. If the invoice was paid via check, a copy of the check will actually go back into ImageNow, an image of it, and that way when you pull that invoice up in the future, you can always see a copy of the check that went out to the vendor. This has proved really useful, so if a vendor calls us and says they never received a check for some reason, we can show them a copy of the check to prove that payment actually went out the door. So we just walked through a simplified version of our workflow. What you see on the screen now is actually our full workflow that resides on the back end of ImageNow. You can see that it's rather complex and there's lots of squares and arrows, but I wanted to show you that this workflow is actually fully customizable, and although it looks pretty complex, you can set this up basically by using the same tools that you might use in Microsoft Visio. So it doesn't take very much training or learning from an administrative standpoint to set up your own workflow and to make modifications to it. So what does this all mean? What are the benefits that AEG is getting by changing their accounting process or AP process with the use of ImageNow? Well, I can tell you that it's cut our payment cycle down by approximately 60%. We are no longer paying any late fees on our invoices. We've started negotiating early payment discounts with many of our vendors and have started actually reaping the rewards of those early payment discounts. And we obviously have better relationships with our vendors because we are now paying them on time. All of that means that we are saving millions of dollars a year because we are no longer having to pay those late fees, and we are taking advantage of early payment discounts. We also clearly no longer have any more lost or misplaced invoices. Once an invoice gets into the system and starts going through a workflow, we can track it at every point of the process. So if a vendor calls us to ask us where payment is, we can now tell them precisely where that invoice is, who it might be sitting with for approval, and when they should expect to be paid. Lastly, we no longer have to do any filing or storing of documents off-site. Everything is stored within ImageNow. It's now our electronic file cabinet. And in our old state, when we had paper to file, we were only able to find those invoices by one criteria. So we may have filed our invoices by vendor name, and we would have to find that invoice by vendor name. With ImageNow, any of the fields that have been populated can be searched on. So we can now search for one particular invoice by not only the vendor name or vendor number, but also by the invoice amount, the invoice date. Any of the fields that are indexed can be searched on.
Thanks, Brandon. Excellent job outlining your AP solution and describing the benefits of our partnership. So I want to give Brandon a few moments here to catch his breath. So this might be a good opportunity. If you have questions for him, go ahead and send those in. So I want to take a moment now and give you a brief overview of Perceptive Software. Perceptive was founded in 1995 in Kansas City with customers in over 30 countries. In 2010, we were acquired by Lexmark International, but remained a standalone software business within the Lexmark Corporation. We are now one of the 10 largest ECM providers in the world. So how does Perceptive Software bring value to our customers? I'm going to run through a common customer scenario that we see. So like AEG, most organizations utilize an ERP system. This is a core product and key to making your business decisions. There's two main categories that support your ERP, one being the processes. These processes keep your business flowing smoothly. The second is the content. This is the forms, the paper documents, the emails, and the electronic files that you use on a regular basis. So it is cited that 74% of these processes are manual, and studies indicate that 80% of the corporate content is unstructured. So corporations are left with an ERP system that has limited views to their processes and their content. So the challenge is that the overall visibility of these processes and content lie outside of the ERP's control. So this is where the greatest potential of cost savings can be found and where the majority of the risk resides within a corporation. So in a perfect world, you would just simply change the ERP systems as your business needs change. Well, we all know the phrase, quick to change, definitely does not apply to these large ERP systems. Forrester recently conducted a survey of business process professionals. 79% of them stated that the inflexibility of their ERPs was one of their biggest corporate challenges. So this picture that I drew today is locked. Simply nothing that can be done. So what are some of the keys to solving the situation? Well, this is where Perceptive Software comes in. We can unlock the potential of your existing application. We can expand your corporate view that will allow you to see all of your processes and content and allow you to see the big picture. So by working with Perceptive Software, we allow you to gain the intelligence by clearly seeing all of the processes and content. We allow you to create automated levels of control within your organization. And finally, we give you greater visibility that until now remained outside of your ERP's view. So what we bring to the table is expertise in back office solutions. We bring best practices to over 650 customers in accounting, finance, HR, and other back office areas. We provide easy integration to all applications. So Brandon did a great job today outlining his success with ImageNow and his J.D. Edwards system. But we easily integrate with Oracle, PeopleSoft, Lawson, SAP, Microsoft Dynamics, and many more. Perceptive Software has deployed in all major industries from the retail to the government sectors and everything in between. And finally, regardless of the size of your project scope, we bring benefits to you through our industry-leading products and expertise. So feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Here's our information. That concludes my presentation. Now I want to turn it back over to Brandon for question and answers. So I'm looking here, Brandon. It looks like there was one question posted online. Does your system have the authorization element that will limit who has access to what?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, Corey. ImageNow has a ton of security built in, and you can pretty much customize how you want to set up the security as a client of theirs. So we've actually, the way we kind of envision it is ImageNow is our electronic file cabinet. And if you had a true file cabinet in your office that had multiple drawers and there was a key to each drawer, we can now choose who gets those keys and choose who gets to open which drawers. Additionally, you can do further security. So once you have that drawer open, you can choose who has like the mini key to open up each of the different files within that drawer. So you can actually customize the security to be as detailed as you want or as high level as you want. So ImageNow grants you that flexibility, and it's been pretty useful.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brandon. Another question that has come up is, can approvals be escalated? For example, if a manager is on vacation, does the approval roll up?
Yeah, that's another good question. As I talked about earlier with our approvals, if somebody does not take action within a certain time period, those invoices will automatically escalate to the next user. So if somebody doesn't take action or they're on vacation and they forgot to tell somebody they're going to be out of the office, those invoices will automatically climb the approval hierarchy. You can actually also notify your administrator if need be and tell them you're going to be out of the office, so you could purposely bypass them in the approval process while they're out of the office.
Okay, great. Third question that has come up is, do you have a standard process for entering paper documents into the system?
Good question. So the one method I talked about earlier was having our vendors send the paper invoices directly to our third party, Scanning America, and they can do that via email or regular snail mail. We actually also created our own internal email addresses for our internal folks to use. So if we have an invoice or a check request that needs to be paid urgently, when something goes to Scanning America, it takes a day to get into the system. With the in-house email addresses we set up, it gets into ImageNow within 10 minutes. So if we have an urgent request that needs to be paid right away, that's the method we tell our accounting staff to send those wire requests or check requests to, and then they get into the system immediately. So our staff at that point is then scanning that paper document or emailing it directly to that email address, and then it gets into the system.
Okay, good. And it looks like there's only one final question left. And it's, how long did it take to implement your solution that you're currently running now?
It was actually rather quick. We had to implement a new solution and also integrate it with J.D. Edwards. It actually only took us about 3 or 4 months to implement the whole process, so we were rather happy with that short time frame.
Thanks, Brandon. That's great insight. I think that is our final question. Again, I wanted to thank Brandon Weiss with AEG for his time today. This concludes today's webinar, How AEG Worldwide Reduced Its Payment Cycle by Approximately 60% with ImageNow, presented by Brandon Weiss and Corey Crane. For any further information, please visit Perceptive's website at perceptivesoftware.com. Thank you for joining us today.